honor the great legacy of perhaps the greatest preacher of our time. And I'm glad to have been invited by the greatest singer of all time. And thank God, my sister, thank God for her. I had the pleasure of meeting her through Reverend Jackson during his second campaign. Met her briefly then, but I've had the opportunity to get to know her a little more. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for allowing me to be your friend. But I met her brother in Reverend Jackson's first campaign, Cecil. Cecil was one of the most brilliant young men I've known. When I met him, I was working on the campaign, and he was supporting Reverend Jackson. So I had an opportunity, and then later Mayor Young had an opportunity to form a relationship with him. And I was just fascinated by the wisdom and the history that he was able to give me, both about the city of Detroit, the national civil rights movement, and indeed his dad, Reverend C.L. Franklin. Much of what he informed me of, I really didn't know. He taught me much about the civil rights movement. He also taught me, however, that there was a superstar pastor who was nationally known, named C.L. Franklin, his father. He told me, and as I look back, he really preceded the so-called superstar evangelists of the day. He preceded the T.D. Jakes and established that format, traveling throughout the country. Indeed, he was our Billy Graham. He could just preach better. Cecil told me and gave me the history, and I was fascinated to learn about the work his dad and his sister had gone throughout the country doing. Not only spreading the gospel, but exemplifying the gospel. He told me how Dr. King relied so much on his dad, and how not just in Detroit, throughout the country, he supported Dr. King's initiatives and movements, both in the South, and was indeed his point man here in the North. Many may or may not know that word for not, Pastor Franklin's efforts in the march he organized here in 1963 in Detroit, where Dr. King first gave his I Have a Dream speech, where he first laid the model and the format for the National March in Washington, D.C., were it not for Reverend Franklin leading that march, organizing and coordinating that march. Labor and all the others came aboard, but it was he, and Reverend Jackson probably said all of this, so I'm not going to spend any more time talking about it. But we know now that were there no C.L. Franklin, that perhaps there would be no Civil Rights Act or no Voting Rights Act. The March on Washington resulted in the Civil Rights Act. The March on Washington, laid out by Reverend C.L. Franklin, led to the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act, some 30 years later, led to President Obama. So let us be clear that President Obama also also stands on the shoulders of Reverend C.L. Franklin. Indeed, I'm not confused. As a young Detroiter, coming up on the hard side of life, there's no way I would have been able to come into the success I've enjoyed without the leadership here in Detroit, many of whom he trained and mentored and opened the door for folks like myself and the many others who serve as leaders in this city and around the nation. So I thank God personally, and I thank the Franklin family for bestowing upon us, sharing with us, one of the greatest, or the greatest preacher of his time. And we thank God that he created and gave to us what presidents, Queen of England, Billboard magazine, U.S. Congress, all have dubbed as the greatest singer of all times. So I am honored, as I do, I am honored to participate in the naming of a street for someone who has done so much for this city and this world. The naming of a street that will forever reflect the work that he's done and the honor that we give him. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, my dear sister. I love you to death. All the Franklin family, all the family of New Bethel, all my leadership family. Thank you all much.